Welcome everyone and good afternoon for today's event in the Senior Leadership Insight Series. This is our second event in the series, and today's conversation is sponsored by the Graduate School in partnership with the Department of History. The series was created and developed by a group of volunteers from the Graduate Board of Visitors, and I want to especially welcome and thank those members of the board who are joining us for today's call. My name is Melissa Bostrom, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School. We're going to have a very focused time together today, so let me just tell you a few logistics to kick us off. We'll begin the conversation with the 6 key questions that we advertised, and then we'll turn to the questions that attendees shared through the registration survey. We also hope to have time to answer questions that come through the chat. And I'll be helping to moderate the questions and share them with Professor Bonker, who will be conducting the interview today. As you'll note from the slide, the session is being recorded. So if you prefer not to appear in the room, please do keep your video muted and you can share your questions in the chat. So with those details out of the way, I'd like now to introduce Dr. Dirk Bonker, who is Associate Professor and Director of Graduate Studies in the Department of History, who will be interviewing our special guest, Dr. Lisa Yvette Waller today. Dr. Bonker.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It is a great honor and privilege to be here and be part of this conversation series. So our guest today, Dr. Lisa Waller, is head of school at the Berkeley Carroll School, an independent pre-K to 12 school in Brooklyn, New York. She took on this leadership role beginning in July 2019, bringing more than 30 years of experience in education to the school. Before the Berkeley Carroll School, she spent 23 years at the Dalton School, where her roles included serving as Associate Director of Admissions, K-12, Director of Dalton's High School, and Assistant Head of School for Progressive and Inclusive Practice. Dr. Waller has been a featured presenter at the Ford Foundation, Association for Independent Schools Annual Conference, and the New America Foundation. And she's a member of the Board of Trustees at her undergraduate alma mater, Oberlin College, as well as a member of the Graduate Board of Visitors at Duke, where she received her PhD in history in 1998. So entitled Holding Back the Dawn, Milton A. Gulamaisen and the Fight for School Integration in New York City, a Northern Civil Rights Struggle, 1943 to 1963. Dr. Waller's dissertation is an important study of African-American civic activism and protest in the urban North in mid-20th century, that is before the rebellions of the 1960s. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Waller back to Duke virtually for today's conversation. So welcome, Dr. Waller.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, so let me then just start with our questions. So my first question is, could you tell us more about your background and what was your path to your current role?
Sure. So as you indicated, I was a student at Duke University, in the history department, and working on all of that coursework, got it done, and looked to come to New York City to begin my research on Milton Gulamaisen because he was a minister in Brooklyn and Bed-Stuy, and so I knew that I would have access to his papers if I came here. And so, came on to New York, but also wanted to work and to stay alive and survive. And, I was doing a little bit here, a little bit there, but ultimately I took a position at Dalton as a teacher in the history department. And that was a part-time job so that I could continue my studies, and that was perfect for me. It's like I was teaching 2 classes, advising kids, but as everyone says, there's no such thing as a part-time job. And so once I signed on at Dalton, I found myself constantly being drawn into various things that the school wanted to put on. So admissions work, things of that nature. And as I did more and more of that, I realized that I should just go ahead and work full-time, but also to devote myself to my studies very carefully during the vacations, on the weekends, after school, et cetera. So I developed a very stringent schedule for myself so that I could be a full-time teacher while also doing what I needed to do to complete the doctorate. And that actually worked out quite well. So I took that position at Dalton and began to do some additional administrative work. For instance, I ran the accreditation process for the school, and that allowed me to know more about the overall workings of the school from both the programmatic and the operations side, which ultimately stood me in good stead. Once I completed the doctorate, I was encouraged to put my hat in the ring to become the director of the high school there. And I did that and happily earned that position and stayed in that post for about 13 years. But after several years, I was also promoted to assistant head of school. And for a while, did that, I think maybe 2 years before I decided that I would go on for a headship. There were a number of schools that had headships open in Brooklyn at the same time. And I was fairly heavily recruited to participate in those searches and immediately saw that BC, Berkeley Carroll, was the fit for me. And happily, they felt the same way. And so here I am in my second year.
Wonderful. So can you tell us more about sort of the Berkeley Carroll School and perhaps also about Dalton School and describe maybe a typical day for sort of a PhD level higher at these schools and for you?
Sure. Dalton, similar to Berkeley Carroll, both schools have a primary school, a middle school, and an upper school. Dalton is somewhat bigger. There are about 1,300 students at Dalton, and there are close to 1,000 at BC. But I can talk more specifically now about BC. It's a coeducational school, a private school here in Brooklyn. And we have about 274 employees serving those almost 1,000 students and their families. A very diverse community. We draw students from all over New York because we have a free bus service. And so if you decide that you want your children at our school, we're able to pick them up from wherever they live in the metropolitan area. And that means we have quite a bit of geographical diversity, racial diversity, socioeconomic as well. We strive to be inclusive in that and to think about inclusivity, not only in terms of the demographics of the school, but also our curriculum and things of that nature. And, the tagline is that we try to promote critical, ethical, and global thinking. And my feeling is, having been here for 2 years now, it's more than a tagline. You really do see that kind of permeating what happens at the school. Most of the folks here who are PhD level hires are on the teaching faculty. And the teachers offer a number of courses. So, there's the core curriculum, as would be the case at Duke, and then people offer electives that are hinged to their own research interests and that sort of thing. I found this to be true at Dalton as well as to be true here at BC, and that is for a person who is steeped in scholarship. There is a lovely sort of fit, I would say, for people who are in the academy or looking at the academy. Obviously the structures are not exactly the same, but there is really an opportunity to share one's research interests with other people. There's time to write. And so you do have a number of PhD folks who come to the independent schools and decide to stay. There are some good things that come with that as well in terms of professional development, paying for coursework, paying off student loans. So there are a lot of benefits, I would say, to joining up with an independent school as someone who has the doctorate. I am one of the people with the doctorate at BC, and my role is fairly unique in that, it kind of all rests in my hands. As head of school, I'm responsible for the academic and the operations area of the school. And on a given day, because I know that's one thing that people are interested in, sort of a day in the life, one of the exciting things about this work is each day is different. You wake up and you know what you're meant to do, what's on the schedule, but you never know what's really going to happen because there's always something changing, new things coming up all the time, the unexpected. And this was even before COVID. And so you can imagine in the aftermath of COVID what that is like. But on a given day, I might meet with the directors of the lower school, the middle school, and the upper school to talk about faculty professional development, to talk about hiring, to talk about budget, to talk about curriculum. And then I might visit an 11th grade American Studies class. Today, the American Studies students took us all on walking tours of areas of New York City so that they could bring their studies in American Studies to life in situ here in the city. And so I was taken over to the Lafrac Center at Prospect Park, booked it back for a primary school kindergarten dance class, had a conversation with our development director about fundraising. You could meet with a family affinity group meet with neighbors about the fact that we close off the streets so that the kids can have more outdoor space during COVID. And that, of course, means negotiating. And so there's really, I mean, I can't, there's an endless array of meetings and communications, et cetera, that would happen from one day to the next. And that keeps it interesting and exciting, but it's also, I have to say, tremendously exhausting. So there's that part of it as well.
May I sort of ask a follow-up question here about sort of faculty with PhDs? So how many of your faculty actually does have, I mean, how many of them do have PhDs?
That is a great question. And I don't actually have that number ready to the hand, okay. But a significant proportion, but I'm afraid to hazard a guess and then end up being quite over or quite under, but a significant number. And there are others who are still in the process of completing the doctorate, and we've been supporting them as well.
Okay, well, thank you.
Sure.
So speaking of the doctorate, so what do you see as the value that doctoral training has added to your professional trajectory?
For one, I think the capacity to ask good questions. That is, I think, absolutely central to the work I do, because it, ranges so broadly. So looking at a capital project where we're going to build a new facility. I'm not trained in building, I'm not trained in any of that, but to be able to ask the right kinds of questions of the right people leaves me able to help guide and shepherd that work. So the capacity to ask good questions, the ability to glean and organize information, to be persuasive, to use the written word to full effect. That's something that is always happening. I'm always writing or talking with people about what's going on at our school, what I hope for, sort of aspirational discourse, but also what we're doing and explaining things. And so the capacity to use words and use them well is important. I think there's a kind of need when you're a doctoral student to know when to change your mind, to alter your thesis, to move in a different direction and not doggedly hold on to where you were when you began a project. And that's something that I value in my work. Patience as well, knowing that certain things take time, but also knowing when you have to put the gas on and get it done. So I would say all of those things have served me quite well over the course of my career and continue to do so.
I mean, I was also struck just by looking at your dissertation, how close, in a way, your scholarship, it is about the question of school integrations and schools in New York in the mid-20th century, and now you're working as an educator. So there's also kind of an immediate connection.
Yeah.
The what you actually worked on and the kind of and the issues that matter to you, both in terms of your scholarship and in your current role.
Absolutely true. And, thinking about even the political climate that we are in right now and the sort of racial reckonings that our schools are navigating, I think having the discourse of my dissertation, the ways that people were talking about quality education, what integration signified at that time, and what people are calling for today in terms of a quality education for kids of color, those things are still quite relevant. And I do find myself thinking quite a bit about that work as I continue on this journey.
Yeah. So beyond sort of your strong research skills, what other skills, experience, and your training are important for success in your field?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, those sort of qualities of mind that I think go along with a successful graduate career. I will say this, the capacity to write well and quickly is one that doesn't initially come to mind when one thinks of being head of school, but it's been absolutely critical. And again, all the more so in the face of the racial reckonings, in the face of COVID. I am constantly having to write things and put them out to, 1,000 people who need to be able to understand what I'm getting at, who need to kind of row in the same direction. And so that ability, I think, is really important, to know who to go to get information that you don't have. Again, like, what kinds of questions do you ask and of whom do you ask them? I think that's critical, because one of the things that's daunting about being head of school is, again, the range of areas for which you have responsibility. I'm responsible for the grease traps in the kitchen and whether they're functional or not, so I'm not laying hand to that, but ultimately at the end of the day, it comes back to me. The buses, the curriculum, whether we decide to have an in-person versus a not in-person graduation, hiring, expanding the faculty, contracting the faculty, growing the school, all of these things. And, you know, then there's, of course, the history curriculum where I feel like I have quite a bit of expertise, you know, but that is a tiny sliver of what I'm called to shepherd every day. And so being able to do research, to ask questions, to double back and ask additional questions, to find out and to be confident in a course that one sets, I think is really critical. And Duke was very helpful to me in that, for sure.
So are there, speaking of Duke, so are there any skills, sort of training or experiences you wish you had in graduate school to prepare you for your current career path?
Yeah. You know, I think that for the most part, no. The things that I wish I had more grounding in are things that I don't think, you know, I don't think the department was called to offer me these. But, you know, I think about, for instance, more grounding in finance. I think that folks in the humanities, just understanding that world and how it works, whether in your own life as a professor managing your TIAA CREF or whether running an institution, you know, I've learned so much about that area. And I think that most people who go on to be head of school, unless they happen to have a background in finance for some reason, that's often the place where you think, ooh, I'm going to have to learn a lot and learn it quickly. And I've been able to do that. But, you know, that breadth, I wish I had sooner. And I know most of the people with whom I work as colleagues, as heads, think the same thing. But I don't know that there was anything to be done for that. I feel that I was quite well grounded at Duke. You know, I was able to present my work to folks, you know, I was in a band while I was in graduate school. So I was able to stretch out and do pretty much all of the things that I wanted to do and felt very well rounded in that work.
Yeah. So I make a note to ask you about the band later on. I want to hear more about the band.
I'll let you know.
So it's interesting what you said about sort of finance, because I think there's a conversation, I think now about sort of the importance of quantitative skills. Mm-hmm. And I think the way in which I think in the humanities, mm-hmm. necessarily a place where a lot of training in quantitative methods happen, and in a way that may translate to financial skills, or at least.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, another thing that I think about that has been helpful for me, I think, in terms of continuously, you know, kind of sparking that light, that desire to know and to learn and to grow, is that I had to take one of the language exams in order to, you know, fulfill my requirements for the PhD. And I had studied Latin as a student in high school. And so I didn't have any spoken languages under my belt. And I decided that I would teach myself Spanish because I was also quite interested in Spain because of a friend. And I will say that the need to kind of buckle down and learn a lot of Spanish on my own because of that requirement became a kind of continued passion of mine. And so I've continued to study Spanish on my own. And I've gotten, I'm happy to say, better and better at it. And so there's a place also where what might have looked like a hoop to jump through became something that's really important to me and to my family, my children as well. And so that was a lovely byproduct of having to complete that requirement.
Okay. So what can sort of students who would like to work in your field or explore it further do to prepare?
Well, I think a few things. One is it can't hurt to go on the website of the National Association of Independent Schools, which is sort of the umbrella organization for these independent schools in this country. And by independent schools, we mean private schools. So going onto their website and just kind of getting a feel for the discourse there, what people are talking about. There's an independent schools magazine that gives you a sense, again, of some of the current and burning issues in the independent school space. These schools are quite different from region to region, size to size, et cetera, mission to mission, but there are some things that they hold in common. So I think checking that out. Also, going onto the websites of various independent schools allows you to get a feel for the way these schools promote themselves, their curricula, et cetera, their values. There are conferences, including the National Conference of the National Association of Independent Schools and the People of Color Conference, where if you look at the themes that they've pursued over the years, look at the bulletins, again, you get a sense of the vibe and what's important there. And I would even say, and this may be even more possible now, thanks to the Zoom times that we live in, going on some of the tours, the admissions tours of these schools allows you to see a bit of the culture and to get a sense of whether this is a place where one might like to make a career. It's been, for me, completely gratifying. And it wasn't necessarily expected, except to say that I had taught at an independent school directly out of college. Like I was like 21 and my oldest students were 18. I taught there for 2 years before coming to Duke. And so I was coming back to something essentially that I knew I loved and that was kind of resonant for me. But I think whether even if you've never taught in an independent school, doing some of these things gives one a flavor for it.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I have like two questions that sort of arose out of sort of the registration process. So the first question here is, what were your goals in pursuing the PhD? So as you entered graduate school, and did that change over time when in graduate school?
Mm-hmm. I think partly I wanted to kind of go as far as you can go in a field of study. And so as an undergraduate, I was so thrilled to kind of come to understand that there was like a canon of African-American history, African-American literature. And even though we're constantly like rupturing those canons, it was exciting to me to know that the things that I had experienced and knew as an individual, as a person, as a child, as a student, that these were things that people were studying and had arguments about and schools of thought about. And so that was really exciting to me. And once I discovered that as an undergraduate, I really wanted to be a part of that and to take that as far as I could. And so that propelled me through graduate school and to the doctorate. So that was one of my goals. I think that there was something to me that was representative in being able to accomplish something that so few people actually accomplish, and to say nothing of the underrepresentation in terms of my race and my gender. So that was important to me as well. So those were some of the reasons. I loved the study, and I also, frankly, felt that it was my responsibility to go as far as I could, given the sacrifices that had been made for me in order to be able to be a student in a private school and to do this work.
And sort of the other question, sort of in your view, both, as a scholar of sort of the politics of school integration and as an educator, so where are we in the struggle for diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what, based on your experience, do you see as a contribution that a PhD program like ours sort of can make here?
Well, sometimes when I think about where we are, I despair a bit. I don't think anyone has quite gotten it right in terms of true equity and inclusion in our schools. But there's this kind of irony, right? That, here I am in New York City, where the public schools are profoundly segregated, more segregated now than they were when I was studying the public schools in New York City, looking at the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so you have this irony where these private schools, understood to be these sort of bastions of elitism, are among the few institutions where there are people of different races and socioeconomic backgrounds, et cetera, in school together. So I always say to my community, we have a profound responsibility to see what we can do with this confab of folks, with this group of people, because you don't see it much in any of the other schools, including the public schools. And I think it's in fits and starts that we get to that place of true equity and inclusion. But I think it's up to us to do our part to contribute. Even as we sort of contend with the fact that there is a relationship between private and public schools, and sort of, there are some big issues to untangle there as well. So I think it's a constant challenge. And I guess, again, with the PhD program, a few things. One is education in general is undervalued in our society. And there were people who asked whether I was prepared to sacrifice the opportunity to teach college, to be in the academy, in order to do the thing that I'm doing with these students aged 3 to 18. And there is an explicit devaluing of education in that question, right? And so I feel that people who are pursuing the doctorate should understand this population of students to be completely worthy of all the work, the sacrifice, et cetera, that, graduate students apply as they pursue this degree. And it is that valuation, that understanding that this work is important. You can have a PhD and teach kids who are 4 years old and teach them well. Like, nothing is wasted in doing that work. And in fact, there's much to be gained. And so I feel that folks in our program here at Duke have a tremendous amount to offer to this particular sector of education. Mm. And I think the other piece of it is that this particular sector of education also reciprocates nicely. There is, in a school like this one, people value that their peers have done research. People value that you want to frame up a course on, post-colonial literature in wherever it is. Like, that's something that you get to do for this population when you're looking at some of the older kids and feel valued for it. So I felt very whole, I guess I would say, as a scholar as well as a practitioner in education.
Well, thank you. I think we have now some time for questions from the chat or live from the audience. I think, Melissa, you're keeping track of this.
I am keeping track of this. Thank you. Greg Kidd had a question that he posted in the chat, but I think Lisa may have seen that question, kind of integrated her answer to that question into her answer to your question as well, Dirk. So
I see that question now. I'm not good with multitasking with the Zoom. It's like I'm either talking or I'm reading, but I can't do both. But I can add something. Here at Berkeley Carroll, we are in a partnership with an organization called the GO Project in New York City. And the GO Project seeks to lift up the educational attainment of public school students who are flagging. So there are lots of programs that help kids who are like in the top 10% of their class to go on to private schools and things of that nature. But the thing that's really compelling to me about GO is they have focused their attention on students who are failing, who are below grade level in mathematics and in reading, and have lifted those children up to grade level and beyond, which will change their lives as opposed to continuing not to be at grade level. And we partner with them in terms of providing them with space. Like we were able to provide some computers during the whole COVID thing. Our students will work with GO students from time to time. And we really think about kind of how together, like I'm on their board, how together we can help to serve a population in Brooklyn, and we are the first Brooklyn site. There are a few in Manhattan as well, to say that, there's a way in which we have a responsibility to students beyond the ones who are in our immediate care. And so that's one partnership that I'm really excited about, and that hopefully we'll be back live now that we are coming out of the COVID times.
Terrific. The other question that came in through the registration was from a student standpoint. Lisa, if students are interested in working at independent schools, is that NAIS website that you are referring folks to, is that a place that they can go to look for those kinds of postings?
I don't think that you will find postings on NAIS's website, but rather, you'll get the kind of gist of the organization and the kinds of schools that it serves. I think in order to see postings for jobs, where you'd be looking is on the websites of the various schools. And I believe that there is a roster of the schools that are in NAIS. You can literally see like what region they're in and get a sense of schools that you might check out in terms of the website. Carney Sando is probably the biggest name in teacher placement for the independent schools. And Carney, there's like a huge net. They have multiple conferences over the course of a year where people, hand in their dossiers. Carney does some matching so that, the schools like Carney know what they need, people who are searching indicate what regions they might want to be in, what kinds of posts they might want to have, and they have a number of big conferences. They also are at the national conference so that people can be interviewed kind of the way it would happen at the AHA or something like that. So there's that happens as well. And then there are regional regional events and organizations. So for instance, here in New York City, we're part of the New York State Association of Independent Schools, and they run a bunch of hiring fairs and things of that nature as well.
Thank you. That's wonderful, very practical advice for anybody whom you may have inspired with your stories today.
I hope I have. No one is going to be mad if you decide that you're not coming the independent schools way, but I'd like to think that for some of you, it's a really exciting prospect, and at least check it out so that you know what's available in this sector of education.
Terrific. Lisa, do you have one extra minute? Looks like we do have one question from the audience.
I do.
Okay. John, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was just wondering, there are schools like North Carolina, state government-supported schools like North Carolina Museum School of Science and Math, which are in a way public-private schools and quite unusual in their profile. I know there are a number of other states that have it. I was wondering what the relationship is between highly specialized and highly specialized public schools and the private school sector. Because it would seem to me that they're most alike in term between the two sectors. They're a point of contact. I mean, I'm not just thinking about Stuyvesant or something in New York. I'm just thinking of North Carolina.
Right. Well, obviously for me, being in New York, that's the place I know best. And actually, I have two children, both graduating shortly, one from college, one from high school. And the older one left private school and went on to LaGuardia High School for the performing arts, one of the specialized schools in New York City, and the other stayed in her private school and is about to graduate. And so it was interesting because I was on a couple of boards at LaGuardia and was able to make some comparisons between a specialized public school that was funded robustly compared to some others, and private school in which I worked. And I do think there were some similarities in terms of a focus on excellence, though in the case of LaGuardia, obviously they care about the academics and the performance, but all of the extras were in the area of performance, right? So, their history curriculum, for instance, was pretty straightforward, and all of the extras had to do with all of those different ways that you could be involved in dance and music and acting, et cetera. And in my school, you had a course of study in history that would be familiar to anyone at Duke. Literally anything that you could think a professor would offer was being offered at our school. And we had certainly a robust arts program, but it was just a very different emphasis. And so those were some similarities. But differences, I think, really hinged on the bureaucracy conjoined to these specialized public schools. So even though there were many students who were very high performing and all of that, there were certain strictures. I remember the kids needed psychology books, and I was on this parent thing, but there was a rule that you couldn't use the school's money to pay for used books. You could only use the school's money to pay for new books, but the used books were perfectly functional. They were cheaper than them, so we were like hung up in this wild circle where we wanted to get these books, but there was this rule that they had to be new, but we couldn't afford them if they were new. We couldn't afford them if they were used. Those kinds of things that in a school like mine, you would just wave your finger and make that go away. So those collaborations, I think, are sometimes harder to conceive because the strictures that each group works with are so different. Having said that, I think there's probably a lot of sort of thinking we can all do, and I'm especially thinking about the students here, like how students might come together to work on some of these issues. And I do know that here in the city, a group of students, Black students, have come together to think about improving the performance in terms of equity and inclusion in their schools. And I know that there are public school kids and private school kids who are in that conversation together. And I think that's pretty exciting.
I think about it a little bit as well, because my wife, who's from Philadelphia, went to Girls High in Philadelphia. And that, of course, has a set of people out there. It's a public school. including the former female mayor of Atlanta, and so on and so forth. And there are a number of these these sort of distinguished selective schools that are available in a number of cities. And they occupy kind of somewhere between being independent or private schools and being public schools. They're sort of a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's, as you know, in New York, there's quite a lot of conversation right now about the specialized schools in terms of the ways from a racial vantage for brown kids, they kind of like not there anymore, and how we contend with that. So there are a number of very interesting things to look at, both in those schools and also in our own.
Great. Thank you.
Well, that is a wonderful place, I think, to wrap things up this afternoon. Thank you so much to the audience for your terrific engagement and wonderful questions today. It's been such a delight to feature you, Dr. Waller, and thank you so much to Professor Bonker for conducting the interview today. We look forward to seeing many of you for future events in this series later on this summer. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Wonker, and thanks to you all. It was good to be here. I appreciate it.